morning and welcome. What an exciting day because I, for a change, have a very revered guest with me. Very popular gentleman who has been so actively discussing different data, trends, and what's happening with Canadian immigration. And it obviously now is my pleasure to bring him on board and basically then we talk about what's happening with Canadian immigration today. Very exciting. So before we go on, let me give you a brief introduction about him. I'm going to be introducing to you Steven Meurrens. Steven is a Vancouver-based Canadian immigration lawyer who advises clients on all Canadian immigration and citizenship issues. And if you're not following him on Twitter yet, I do not know what exactly you're doing on Twitter. So there you go. Welcome, Steven. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
We are very well, thank you. So, are you excited about today?
I am. I'm looking forward to this. I started to get on my Twitter comments occasionally, people saying I need to ask Kubeir, and initially I didn't know what it meant, but now I've seen through your Facebook and YouTube that you've built actually a really cool YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you. Now that you are here on the YouTube channel, it's only going to get better from here. Okay, so first things first, there are so many questions I want to ask you, and most of our audience is obviously also interested in all those questions because my questions basically reflect their sentiment. What do you think is happening with Canadian immigration? What do you think is happening with IRCC? Are they sleeping? Are they awake? What do you think?
What do I think is happening with IRCC? I think that COVID has really hit the department. And actually, I think it's helpful to kind of conceptualize a little bit the framework that I think people should view immigration with. And this stems from a couple articles I wrote a while ago. And I view, when it comes to the creation of immigration programs and processing, that there's a certain principle that people should understand. And there's basically three sides to a triangle, say. And IRCC can only do two things at once with any program. So you have the first pillar, I guess you could call it, is control of immigration numbers, where the department can set targets, restrict how many people can enter. The second is fast processing times. The third is making it possible that everyone who wants to immigrate under a program can immigrate. And it's not possible, in my opinion, to have all three of these things at once. So, for example, if you want to control immigration numbers and have fast processing times, then you have to restrict eligibility. And that's basically the express entry system, right, as a way to restrict eligibility. The Canadian experience class, and especially the federal skilled worker class, very broad programs, but in order to get fast processing times, restrict eligibility, they had to restrict eligibility. Conversely, if you want fast processing times and broad programs, you can have that, but you can't really have a cap on immigration numbers. And that's what we see in the temporary resident streams. IRCC doesn't really have fixed caps the way that they do with permanent residence programs. You don't hear the department talking about 401,000 temporary residents as the goal for the year. It's kind of unrestricted. Similarly, if you want to have everyone apply for a program that's eligible and contain immigration numbers, processing times are going to slow. So I think what we saw is that the department became, in 2021, a lot of people, maybe COVID was the cause of this, but what we saw was the department became very rigid. They wanted, I can't remember if it's 401 or 410,000 immigrants. That was their target. They'd set it several years prior, and they were determined to meet it. They also, I think, were concerned that because of COVID, they didn't have enough applications to meet those targets. So they suddenly broadened criteria or broadened eligibility through the TRPR pathway, through lowering the express entry draw threshold for the CEC to 75 points. That causes an explosion of applications and processing times soar. Now the department seems to be in a state where they're concerned about processing times. So you can see they've slammed shut eligibility to most programs. No federal skilled worker draws. CEC hasn't had a draw since September. And I think that the department this year is going to have to make a decision as to which of the two they are going to focus on. Are they going to increase process or decrease processing times and allow people to apply for immigration and then possibly blow their immigration targets out? Or is it going to be a question of, okay, this is going to be slow processing and that's just it? Historically, processing times were slow. Or do they keep eligibility greatly reduced, which will cause a great strain on the system in terms of temporary residents who are here, and possibly terminate applications that are setting the stage for the possible termination of applications that are in the queue, which there is historical precedent for.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I mean, we have got off to a good start already. You've got into the thick of the matters, but let me sort of take a step back and I'll ask you this: that when IRCC or rather Canada did not achieve their targets in 2020, right? So we basically we were short by about 48% of the immigrant target, of the new landed immigrant target. Do you think that sort of gave them a bit of a jolt, and then they were like absolutely hell bent in any which ways to achieve the target in 2021? So they had to sort of change their own formula of
They
doing
seem
things?
to be. They seem to be extremely determined to make that, like, to get their 401,000 immigrants. Like that was their overall message throughout the year. At the end of the year, it's funny because in a year when Canada admitted like almost a record, if not a record number of permanent residents, frustration with the department was never higher, it seemed, because there's huge backlogs. And it just seemed like in going out of their way to meet these targets that they set, throwing, application first come, first serve out the window, focusing on easy applications, creating the TRPR pathway, which obviously benefited those people who applied under it, although that stream now has big backlogs. They created a ton of frustration elsewhere. And it's, it must be interesting for the department to see that in a year where they have record permanent residence admissions, also record frustration.
I mean, when we talk about frustrations, I'm sure I've seen your Twitter account. I mean, the minute you post anything, the number of comments that come under your, each of your tweets, they're all from people who are so frustrated, who are so angry. I mean, does IRCC even bother to check? I mean, I'm sure there is some sort of monitoring what's happening on the social media, but do you think they even bother to check what's happening out there, and what is the response that people have with all these things that are not, coming up to the expectation of people?
Oh, they monitor it. I've tweeted internal documents that show that they monitor Facebook, they monitor Twitter to see what sentiment is. I'm not sure they view all concerns the same. Like people who are impatient for a federal skilled worker draw, I think given, the overall situation, I don't think the department pays as much attention to that as, say, people who are maybe closer tied to constituents where there could be votes for the, the minister and stuff, and people inside Canada.
So it's always about the vote bank, right? It's always the bureaucracy.
Always.
It's always the
The
politics.
department seems to increasingly operate on just positive spin, not disclosing what's going on, right? Like, is there a reason why they couldn't just announce that there would be no federal skilled worker draws for a certain period? Why they've announced that, or they haven't announced, it's just CEC draws just stopped. And people have to learn through Access to Information Act requests kind of what's going on.
Okay. On that note, I want to ask you this. You seem to be you seem to love, ATIP and all these information that you pick up. How many ATIP requests do you have ongoing at any point of time?
About how many ATIPs do I have? About 20 to 30, I'd say, are going just for mostly policy stuff. There was one ATIP that I got back in 2018. Before, I used to view it as almost just a bit of like a hobby sort of thing to see what you could dig up in terms of policy manuals and things like similar. And sometimes I would do it on file specific stuff. So I always give an example on the podcast where I requested, so a lot of people only request GCMS notes when they do
Yeah.
their ATIP, and
Yeah.
you can sometimes glean stuff from requesting the full physical file. So I had in 2018 a application where we requested the full physical file for my client's application.
Sure.
And you might think, what's the point, right? I submitted it. I would see, like, I would know what I submitted, but it's
Correct.
to get things like emails that might be on the file and printed. And then in this case, there was a post-it note on the main application form, which said, do not disclose concerns about the following. And I actually wound up doing, I think I titled it response to post-it note. And I attached a screenshot of the post-it note and said, you haven't sent me a procedural fairness letter about this. It's not clear from the post-it note if you plan to, but I just want to respond to these concerns.
Wow.
So for your own files, GCMS it's useful, but it's not the full story. The other ATIP I did in 2018, though, that helped shed light for me on what was going on was I do a lot of litigation. And I
Yeah.
noticed in reading federal court decisions that there was all of a sudden, where there had almost never been before, judicial reviews of open spousal work permit refusals,
Yeah.
all from India. So I did a ATIP on that and discovered that through the ATIP, I have a blog post on it, that it was there was an active policy to pursue misrepresentation at the Canadian Visa Office in New Delhi, wherever possible, on open spousal work permits, to quote, as one of the emails said, internal
Yeah.
IRCC emails, send a message to the community. And as soon as I realized that that policy exists, I go, okay, this will change how I treat. I don't do a lot of open spousal work permit applications, but this will treat how I view them and do them.
I mean, so you're saying there's an open policy to sort of look at applications more strictly
Yeah,
and look for misrepresentations. Because I mean, yeah, I understand that there's a lot of marriage of convenience and contract marriages that happen, especially in certain parts of India and subcontinent as well. So you're saying that that they're actively seeking misrepresentation to send out a message to the community. Wow.
yeah.
Okay, this is pretty interesting. Any interesting recent ATIP that you think would give us an insight of what the trends are looking like for 2022? I mean, we know now that because of 2020, they couldn't achieve their targets. So 21 was entirely to do with PR to PR and CEC. Any such indicated trends for 2022?
No, they'll redact what they plan on doing in the ATIPs. Sometimes you see, a heading in an ATIP and a memo to the minister called replacing express entry, and then everything's redacted and you don't quite know what it's about, and different ideas. Anything prospective looking usually will get redacted.
Yeah,
So you're left to speculate. The only thing that we kind of do know is that IRCC every year publishes its immigration targets for a 3-year period going out.
yeah,
And it's on the IRCC websites. And the 401,000 target was set in October of 2020. And so we know that this year in 2022, unless they change things, which they haven't said they would, and again, it's a 3-year plan,
yeah.
the target for 2022 should be 411,000.
That's correct.
So about the same as it was this year, about an increase of maybe 10,000. And what I tweeted earlier and what made the rounds, and I don't have it right in front of me, is that although I've seen a lot of reports elsewhere that the backlog is now up to 1.8 million applications of different sorts, is IRCC can meet a lot of its targets without taking any new applications in 2022. Now, I don't see how they can do that, which again comes back to that question of what are they going to do? So they
Yeah,
have, let's assume, and just as a side note, for me, if I could do one paradigm shift in Canadian immigration, the focus on permanent residence numbers, I
yeah,
don't really understand it because, people will say, well, it's tied to housing. Well, temporary residents live here, right?
yeah.
Students live here.
Yes.
And those numbers impact social services, impact the economy, impact housing. And there isn't the same fixation as there is on the permanent resident stream in terms of a fixed number. So if I could change anything, it would be, I don't think the fixation on permanent residents and the number is that helpful as far as, creating immigration policy. But we
Yeah.
know that that's what they're going to fixate on, and that seems to be the focus. So unless that changes, they have the numbers that they need for 2022 without taking any new applications. We know they're not going to stop intake completely. Well, we don't know that, but it seems extremely unlikely that they're just going to not take new economic class immigration applications this year. So in my opinion, all that's left is either increasing processing times or terminating applications that are in the queue, or just a very restrictive year.
Whoa. This is gonna blow up, Steven. When you say terminating applications that are already in the queue, that can have some very, very serious repercussions because people have invested a lot of time and effort behind an application, right? And if they're already in the queue in processing, can they still be terminated? I know there is a precedence there, but can they still be terminated now?
Yeah, so the precedent would be when the previous conservative government and the Liberals had tried it in the early 2000s, and I think back down, but I don't know that as that time frame as well. But in 2012, 13, I'm sure you remember back then, there was this weird, through ministerial instructions, they had started to say, and this just gives a sense, by the way, when people talk about how long processing time is now, it's been 2 years. Historically, for the federal skilled workers program, that's still very fast. So I've just pulled up a blog post that I did from 2012, and it talks about how in 2012, the government announced the following processing times. First, they were going to treat applications filed before February 27, 2008, different from applications filed between November 28 and 2008 and June 25, 2010. And I'll just pull up New Delhi. So in 2012, the processing time they announced, and maybe I'll just share this. Here we go. We're going to try to share the screen. We'll see how this works. If it doesn't work, we can just shrink it. But there's the processing times. The blog post isn't greatly showing. Is it showing? Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, it is. It is
So
on
what we
screen.
see in New Delhi was they said, if you applied before 2008, your process, this is in 2012, your processing time was 93 months. So you're talking for the 2008 pre-applicants in 2012, they said it would be another 4 years. For people who applied between 2008 and 2010, it would be quicker. And they started to divide between the older applications and the newer applications, completely abandoning first come, first serve. And then, as you'll remember, they eventually just passed legislation to terminate the applications completely. So anyone who hadn't received a positive eligibility decision by a certain date in the federal skilled worker class, the government terminated their applications, refunded the processing fees. I think it was about 1 million people, not applications, but
Wow.
permanent residents and dependents. There was litigation. It went, I think, to the Federal Court of Appeal, which upheld it. Then they did the same thing with the Federal Investor Program. 2 years later, in 2014, they said any applications not processed by this time were terminated. I'm not saying that's for sure going to happen here, but
Sure. No, no.
I wouldn't rule it out completely because, the longer an application remains in the queue, the less likely that it meets the objectives of current immigration, right? So part of the rationale for terminating the previous applications was for the federal skilled worker class, they had, the Canadian experience class became in favor, and it was determined that the skilled worker program no longer met current needs. A lot of the applications now that are in the queue will simply be out of date, right? Like they're out of date. They may be depending on arranged employment that no longer exists. And I wouldn't rule it out completely. It's available to them. And again, I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but I wouldn't completely rule it out.
But if you look at the numbers, and again, a lot of them from the ATIP notes that you yourself have shared, the number of economic applications, and I'm talking about mainly, I'm sure they're not going to cancel out or terminate the CEC applications because it defeats the whole purpose of what they've been trying to do. But if you take federal skilled worker applications, and probably that is the biggest concern for most people out there, uh, there are not too many out there anyways. I mean, there are about less than
No,
40,000
and that's
applications.
the big argument for why they wouldn't. But if they don't process them, and if processing languages, and it's another 2-3 years, I don't know what they'll do. Because they only have two choices if they want, unless they just want to increase their targets, which they haven't signaled that they do. They either have either processing times become longer for those applications. We know they've abandoned first come, first processed.
Yeah.
So either processing times for those skilled worker applications become longer, and the longer they become, the more likely it is that they'll adopt what they've already did. Like we've seen this story where the older skilled worker applications languish, or they have to severely reduce intake elsewhere. But I mean, the longer they reduce intake like this, you're going to have issues where temporary residents here have no means to apply for permanent residence.
Sure.
And I think that's going to create a greater pressure politically to do something about than skilled worker applications.
Of course, of course. But don't you also agree that the political environment has changed what it was in 2012, 2013 versus now? Obviously, different government, different mindset, different way of doing things. And the fact that it's only less than 40,000 applications, it's not going to really dent or rather create any dent if they were to cancel these applications. And if
I mean,
that was
it's
all, if it was, sorry, if that was at all the line that they were going to take, then they would have, I mean, they are still processing applications. Every single day I see passport requests from people whose applications were in 2019, some of them even 2018, but largely 2019, 2020. And if you see 2020 applications, that's not too far back. I mean, that's what, only a year and a half back if you actually see the processing timing. So yeah, I mean, I would like to sort of play on the forever hopeful side kind of a thing and
no,
hope.
I mean, I'm not like I would still only put it at, well, I would say this, I would put it at 20%, call it 20% this year, but each year they don't process these applications, it goes up another 10%.
Okay. All right.
Because like you say, though, but the longer that, I think there's going to be a tension that will emerge between between those skilled worker applications that have been sitting,
Yeah.
and when there will be a CEC draw, because the lack of a CEC draw is going to lead to people having status issues.
Of course. I mean,
Now,
it's
the
already
department could
created a
just
lot
think
of pressure.
bold and extend people's status. I was surprised that during the pandemic, they didn't just issue everyone open work permits and reduce the amount of workload on themselves to shift priorities and processing elsewhere. But
Yeah.
But no,
Okay.
I'm not saying for sure. I'm less confident that, at the start of 2021, I was saying I don't believe that there's any reason they'll process these. At the start of 2022, or sorry, that they'll terminate these. At
Yeah.
the start of 2022, I'm starting to think, okay, you know, I mean, and I think that sentiment is starting to spread because we've been getting more mandamus application requests.
Okay, on
Which
that note,
work.
yeah, let's talk about mandamus. Backlogs have been on everybody's mind, right? Everybody, I mean, almost everybody, 1.8 million people have been affected by these backlogs. I mean, I know people keep confusing between applications and people because the data or the ATIP notes talks about people. Everybody in the media is talking about applications, but application, as you and I, we both know, that could mean multiple people in the same application. So this 1.8 million people who have been affected by backlogs, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, yes, the mandate letter specifically talks about the backlog. Minister Freeland also talked about $85 million infusion specifically to take, or rather to look after the backlogs. What do you think?
I mean, why do I think of the backlogs? In some way, they'll process them, but they'll have to, well, it'll depend in temporary or permanent stream. In the temporary, like resident visa stream, there's a weird situation that, as you know, has emerged where if you apply after 2017 or after September 2021, it's faster than if you applied before. And Not quite sure what the cause of that is. I've talked to some people who used to work for the department, and again, not saying this is the case, but they're convinced that there's IT issues in which applications are just going missing, or not missing, but like the system that brings them forward to be processed might not be working properly. I think also it wouldn't surprise me if the number of mandamus applications that are being filed right now is leading to them almost like having to dedicate a lot of resources to processing those files, because a mandamus does pull an application out of the queue and theoretically divert resources from another application that would have been processed. Ironically, one of the things I saw through an ATIP, and we can talk about Chinook and artificial intelligence, was the minister's mandate letter said reduce processing times.
Yeah.
And that has been the justification for the use of artificial intelligence, bulk processing, and Chinook.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they'll actually process them. There's got to be there's work permit applications from India that have been sitting from 2020 that seem like they're still in the queue. And again, I don't know, are the job offers still valid? Those will take time to process. As far as I know, there's never been a termination of work permit applications. I think COVID-19, when we talked about the different political environment, I think COVID-19 gives the government flexibility and political cover to do a lot.
So, are you saying that mandamus or writ of mandamus, as you call it, would actually help an applicant get an application processed faster?
Yeah, so we filed I've filed a few. I know other lawyers who filed a lot. I think some people are just throwing them in and seeing what happens. And so, for example, we filed mandamus about 2 weeks ago for someone who's a skilled trade applicant. His application was sitting since 2019. And within a few weeks of filing, he got a notification that processing of his application is now resuming. They sent him a document request list. In a way, they just punted it to him and put the ball back in his court, so to speak. But it led to processing on his file. You can usually tell if mandamus, and I've done them for skilled worker applicant who was outside, actually had never been to Canada, had filed in March 2020.
Yeah.
Her application was, mandamus worked, and she's now a permanent resident of Canada. So mandamus does seem to work. Now, I want to make a couple things clear about mandamus, because I've been getting a lot of inquiries about mandamus.
That was going to be my next question. Can we sort of talk more about mandamus? Because I know of a few lawyers who have been talking a lot about it and wanting to sort of get more people to do this. But is that the way to go about it, or would this really work for most people out there? Because it's going to be an expensive process at the end of the day.
So yeah, mandamus is expensive. It also doesn't mean the application has to be approved at the end. It just means there'll be a decision. The way mandamus works, and the test for mandamus is, I feel like I'm writing my memo of argument again. So the test for mandamus is you have to show that there's an obligation on the public body to act. That's always easy in immigration because you file an application, they have to process it. You have to show that the delay in processing has been unreasonable. So I was asked the other day if they're still within the stated processing time of an application, but there's only 2 months left and they haven't gotten their acknowledgement of receipt. Can they do mandamus? I told them probably not, because they're still within the stated processing time. Some federal court jurisprudence suggests that the sweet spot to file mandamus is if it's been about 2 to 3 times as long as it should take. And what's sort of helpful, although the government has changed their website a little bit, is for express entry, it continues to say 6 months. So if you're a CEC applicant and you've been waiting since 2020, you're already twice as long as what they're saying CEC should take. And again, we've succeeded in federal skilled trades and federal skilled worker class. You have to show that you've sent a prior demand for performance. So, sometimes someone will come to me, or a consultant will come to me and they haven't sent a case-specific inquiry on the file, or they've only sent requests that say, please send an update on the application. Whereas there needs to be a clear demand for performance. So you need to have written a case-specific inquiry or to the visa post saying, you know, the processing time has been too long. It's exceeded processing times by this many months. We, request that you process this application within 30 days or 60 days. Mandamus won't work if that step is not taken. There's no reason why it has to be a lawyer that does that step. And I've actually, especially if there's a file where there's a consultant already on it, I'll just tell the consultant that it makes sense for them to do it, because otherwise the application will get transferred to the lawyer. It's one of these things where, I work with a lot of consultants on judicial reviews, and I don't really want to get involved in the processing of the file. And I realized that when I send the mandamus letter, all of a sudden IRCC transfers the file to me, and then we have to transfer it back to the consultant. So it's something that a consultant or an applicant can do. You don't need a lawyer to send the mandamus demand letter.
Just asking for them to sort of give a more detailed response within 30 to 60 days, as in putting them on a time limit. Do you think
not a more detailed, it can either be a more detailed response or complete processing. It shouldn't just be a more detailed response. It should say, so for an example, for the federal skilled worker class person that we did the mandamus for, the call center had told her, it's eligibility, your eligibility's passed, we're just waiting on background checks. Okay. They told her that for a year. And what we did in our demand letter, as well as in the mandamus application, was said, okay, look, this person's from India, and we got through, you can get online the number of applications for permanent residence approved by citizenship. And we said, look, the government, IRCC approved tens of thousands of permanent residence applications for Indian people. Presumably those background checks were done there too. Why is it taking longer for this person? This is unreasonable. Process it within 30 days. Got no response to the case-specific inquiry. I will say this, before COVID, saying that you would file a mandamus application in a case-specific inquiry was very productive. Now it unfortunately is not, and it seems like the actual filing of the mandamus application is required. But within a couple months of filing mandamus, it was the lawyers for the IRCC let us know, her application's going to be approved. She'll get emailed on this date. Mandamus worked really well there. But there needs to actually be a delay, and not just we're nearing the end of this, 18-month processing for a paper PMP or 6 months for CEC application. There actually has to be a delay in processing, and there have to have been requests sent that processing be completed. And you should be able to show some sort of why hardship that the person's facing, which can just be that their life is delayed, and they're in a weird state of limbo.
So what kind of hardship would you think would justify a mandamus, a positive decision for a mandamus?
Oh, it doesn't have to be. Anything from just someone's life is in limbo to they can't get a job because they're stuck on a closed work permit, especially with delays in open bridging work permits, where people are just, that's a separate mandamus topic. To someone if they have temporary resident, this is one you see with people from India in the United States who have temporary resident status, which may soon be expiring. All sorts, job opportunities delayed, life delayed.
Of course.
And what's been helpful is the government, to date, the federal court has not shown any real sympathy to the argument that, well, COVID is delaying things.
Yeah.
Because the government hasn't really explained why in any of the reported federal court decisions.
Okay. But are any of these cases going to the court, or just by the lawyer actually sending the letter for mandamus is getting a decision in a couple of months?
I'm not aware of any mandamus demand letters working lately, but they aren't going all the way to a hearing. It's more that you file the application, and sometimes there's action there. We just had one where there was action on a file where just filing the application in court seems to have led to movement. to, you have to file your applicant's record, so memorandum of argument. The ones that I've done have all resolved there. I've heard from other lawyers that in some cases, hearings may be being scheduled, but not yet. I mean, usually with mandamus, though, they just process them, it seems. Or there's some step like, so this is one of the things that seems to be emerging is, like with one that we did, they just sent a request for further information, which made sense. I guess it was a skilled worker or skilled trades file that had been sitting since 2019. So they just wanted an update on the application. It's a very easy step that IRCC can take to punt the ball back and say, well, look, the ball is now in your court. So we told that person's working with a consultant on their file. So them and their consultant like provided all the additional information in like a day. And so we're still going to proceed and argue, well, look, like they've provided it, like, can, continue with the mandamus.
Sure.
But it's been, I was skeptical at the start of COVID whether mandamus would work because of the pandemic. But once the first few federal court decisions came out that said COVID is not by itself an excuse for slow processing, I've become a lot more, I think it's, if there's been a delay, then I think it's an approach worth looking at.
Okay. Another question, I won't hold you. I'm sure nobody's going to hold you to that, but just give me an average. What would taking this to a lawyer would cost? So if an applicant out there is listening to this and is now interested because they really are facing the hardship, they have been delayed, they want to come to you, give a ballpark range of what it would cost them to sort of file or take this to the court through mandamus.
I've seen all sorts of different structures proposed. I think there's one lawyer who's filing them for about 1,000 Canadian, but then they don't actually like do the follow-up, and they just hope that the filing of the mandamus triggers something, is my understanding. Otherwise, it seems like it's anywhere from a couple thousand to 10,000 plus if a hearing's required, but there's only been a few actual hearings. Like I have filed, quite a few mandamus applications and have yet to do a hearing on them. Yeah, like.
So you're saying a few thousand, so let's say $2,000 to $3,000 for a lawyer to sort of file the letter and take it forward.
And that's if people do a flat fee. The other option is just an hourly approach. Is always an option, and it can be all over the place. Kind of like there's a lot of redundancy that emerges in mandamus applications where you kind of know your arguments that are going to be made, right? They're all. I mean, each person obviously is their own person and everything, but the actual and a delay in an application tends to have the same arguments raised until there's a federal court decision that may change things.
Okay. Right. So another question that I have for you is that the entire 2021, so they had this TR to PR pathway, then they had this huge, incredible draw of 27,332 applications, or rather ITAs on the 13th of February, and then very large chunk of ITAs were issued in every single draw. Obviously, the attention being that they wanted to focus on in-Canada applications. But did it really affect the way Canada should, have been affected in terms of economy, in terms of the number of people? Because all they did was convert the TRs into PRs. So basically, there were no new people who came into Canada. There's nobody. It didn't really matter to anybody. Housing didn't get affected. Jobs are still, there's a big issue with the job market. Did it really make the difference, or was it just a numbers ploy or a numbers game?
Well, that gets into what I was saying earlier. Like, I don't think the permanent resident number is that meaningful because for the most part, in the economic streams anyway, family reunification is different. The people are already here. So, like the TRPR, well, but it does resolve another issue that it's interesting. Before the pandemic, the gap between the number of permanent residents that were admitted and the number of temporary residents was growing, right? Each year it was about 300 to 350,000 permanent residents. And like between students and workers, 1 million plus people arriving. And this gap between people who are going to lose status was increasing. And I used to wonder, what are they going to do to eventually narrow the gap and reduce the number of people arriving as temporary residents and start regularizing the number of permanent residents? Turns out a pandemic allowed them to artificially, through no intention of their own, reduce the number of people arising and start regularizing these people's status. So I think the big thing that the TRPR pathway did, that the big CEC draw did, was it helped reduce the pressures on the system that we're building for people who are already here.
Yeah.
And then, once travel resumes, and travel seems like it'll still be a bit restricted this year. So, they can continue to try, but this assumes they don't, resume the federal skilled worker program, that they can continue to reduce this gap. So that's kind of what the TRPR pathway did, was it helped reduce the gap between the number of temporary residents and number of permanent residents, because otherwise the way the immigration was going, you risked there just being this huge permanent migrant population. The Conservatives at one point tried to address this by implementing a firm cap of 4 years on the number of that a foreign worker could spend here, and then they had to leave, which was subsequently abolished. But that, to me, that was all the TRPR did. Was it good for the economy? As you said, they're already here. It helps provide certainty. It helps people switch jobs. But the big thing to me
They
is
also
just
have the work
reducing the
experience
gap.
and they have the exposure, right? But do you think this is going to come back? Do you think? It's this question is been in a lot of people's mind. Do you think TR to PR is coming back? Just your
I
opinion.
think
What do
if
you think?
it does, I think it should. I'm not certain that the international graduate component of it necessarily needs to come back. I'm not, I don't know why they couldn't have just, and I had clients who got approved through it, which was, good, but I think if I were designing the program, and it's always easy to design programs in hindsight, but if I was designing the program, I probably, and I still don't know why they don't just do something like this, is make the postgraduate work permits 5 years, right? There's other ways to get people their Canadian work experience. Like you mentioned just now, TRPR is good because people have Canadian work experience. Well, not in the international graduate stream of it. So I think that I think there needs to be a way to get a pathway to permanent residence for people who have worked on the front lines or in general during the pandemic. And I would just, for the international grads, I would just extend the length of the postgraduate work permit.
Yeah, but as per the mandate letter, they said something about increasing the pathways within the express entry. So would this be an amalgamation? Would this be a separate pathway? Any thoughts you sort of had a chance to sort of ponder about as to what this could be?
What do I think they mean by that? I think that, they can expand pathways by just giving students more points, international grads more points within express entry. That's a pathway to permanent residence. The big thing they could do, honestly, if they just wanted to increase pathways to permanent residence, is get rid of their target of 401,000 and just, if you've been working here, I think the public would understand it as, the metric is these people have been here and working, and we're just going to convert them to permanent resident status.
Yeah.
That would be the way to do it. What do I think they'll actually do? I'm not sure, because they're fixated on the number.
Yeah.
So if they do provide more pathways to permanent residence, all it means is they have to reduce intake elsewhere, or there'll be increased processing times.
We do expect the new targets to be announced somewhere in the early part of February.
Yeah. They have a 3-year plan, so I don't know why they would abandon, their 3-year plan calls for it to only be 10,000 more than this year. They may change it. They may increase it.
They could also bump up the number for this year, right?
The what?
They could bump up the number for this year as well.
They could. I'm just not sure if they feel it necessary to abandon their plan. came out with a plan in October 2020, which said, here are our plan. Here's the plan for the next 3 years. Do they feel like they need to adjust their plan? Are they unhappy with the plan? What was the point of a 3-year plan if they're just gonna,
Yeah,
right? So I don't know.
but then COVID happened, right? And that
No,
wasn't
this
part
is
of.
October 2020 that they did the plan. Like this was the plan in response to the already low numbers.
Sure, but then they didn't achieve the 2020 target, right? So that's still about 140,000 people short on the numbers. But yeah, let's see how that happens. And obviously, February would give us a better insight of which way they are planning to go.
Yeah. Did they table it? It was usually in October. Maybe the election
No,
pushed
it didn't
things
happen
forward.
then because of the elections. It didn't happen in
Yeah.
November because the elections had just happened and Sean Fraser had just been appointed. The next date indicated is February, that is after the parliament reconvenes.
Mm.
But I have a much larger question for you, and I just need your opinion on that because I know there is no way to absolutely give me anything on that otherwise. Federal skilled workers, what's happening? I mean, the whole purpose of express entry, if you look at the fundamentals of the system, was to identify the best of the best in terms of certain personal attributes or factors: age, education, work experience, language skills. Four main factors to identify the best suited talent or skill out there to sort of invite to Canada, and younger people, basically more tax paying people in the long run. But then no federal skilled worker, understood, because 2020 and 2021 were largely plagued with this whole travel restrictions, etc. But now going forward, what do you think? I mean, I understand the 1.8 million number. I understand that there are tons of people in the backlog already, but really, federal skilled worker, shouldn't they be looking at it and doing something about it? People have been waiting for a very long time.
You're talking about processing or a draw?
I'm talking about the draws. Of course, the processing is a different thing. We already spoke about the
Yeah.
processing. I know there are about less than 40,000.
What do I think will happen, or what do I think should
What do you
happen?
think will happen? What do you think should happen? Where this is going? Your views?
I have a lot of so what I think should happen, people might not want to hear this, but I have a lot of sympathy to the argument that people really aren't going to want to hear this, but I have sympathy to the argument that there shouldn't be a skilled worker draw except for people with arranged employment until every single CEC applicant in the pool has been invited to apply.
Oh, wow.
I have
Wow.
sympathy to that argument, to the people
Okay.
who are already here. And I would even expand the CEC to include Canadian self-employment, which is a separate topic. But what do I think will happen? I think that there may be, will there be a draw this year? I mean, the
What
number of
point
points, it won't be a big draw. The backlog in the pool, like the size of the pool in the federal skilled worker class is such that, you're going to be talking about like the 23-year-old, 26-year-old PhDs who score perfectly on the IELTS. There may be very small draw. The other thing that is happening this year is they're like revising the NOC substantially and getting rid of NOC 0A and B, which is going to require legislative changes to the IRPR, which is the federal skilled worker class is based on the NOC system. And will they use the changing of the NOC structure? Because there hasn't been a change like as big as this, basically since the current federal skilled worker program came into existence. Will they use that to greatly change the way the federal skilled worker class works? Possibly. I could also see them revising express entry. I think it's possible that they'll revise express entry to allow them to do occupation specific NOC draws. So they used to have the federal skilled worker used to be open to all occupations. Then there was a list of 29 occupations, first 1,000 people to apply in those occupations. I could see them going back to that. I'm not that confident that there'll be, and I could be wrong, that there'll be I don't think there'll be regular federal skilled worker draws this year.
Okay, got it. That's
I
huge.
just don't see what is gained. I think the department would be wary to do that, knowing that there'll just be backlogs that form.
But again, if we talk about the backlogs and understanding their processing capacity to approximately 15,000 express entry applications a month, and again through the ATIP notes, largely CECs were cleared off, few federal skilled workers were cleared off. Now they should be coming to the end of clearing out the CECs, and if they do that, and with the processing capacity of 15,000 applications, shouldn't they be clearing out the remaining FSW or federal skilled workers? And if they do, then they should be done with these applications
But
within
the
what?
next, there's going to be a big CEC backlog again. Like, I think it's more likely that there'll be another big CEC draw than frequent federal. Like, the CEC backlog must be growing. Like, not the backlog, the number of CEC applicants in the
Yes, of course.
portal or
Yeah.
with a profile must just be growing and growing. And I think that
Around
that will,
38,000 CEC applications is what was indicated in the express entry pool.
yeah. So then I think 38,000 applications is what, 70, 80,000 people possibly. Like, I think that in the same way that their big CEC draw in February, and this was something I tweeted back in February, where they did the big CEC draw, I said, okay, like, if they're going to maintain their processing standards, they're very close to not being able to do any more draws in express entry. I'm not quite sure what they're going to do. Ultimately, they didn't do any federal skilled worker draws, and CEC shut down in September, and they got rid of their when the processing times increased. But I I think the pressure of the growing, and like, as CEC levels may also be low now in the port and like the express entry profiles, because there was that delay in people being able to come and work. As people start getting their year of work experience and it starts getting a year that they've graduated, um, I think the pressure will build. I think there's going to be much greater pressure to do something about people waiting for a CEC draw than a skilled worker draw.
Oh, wow. Okay, so then, I mean, I know I've been holding you here for an hour almost, so I just have the last two questions before I let you go for today.
Right. Do we
Uh,
have questions from anyone, or?
we haven't, right? So we haven't
Okay.
even finished our discussion. Trust me, there are tons and tons and tons of questions. I mean, I could basically, if you have the time, we could go with them. Uh, these last two questions, and I think with most of the questions that I've been asking you, that is answering a lot of questions, anyways. But what do you then have a suggestion? Would you have a suggestion for people who have been waiting for a federal skilled worker draw and they have been also equally frustrated? So, for example, when Canadian, and I raised this in the NCIC conference when we were there in my first day, and I raised this with the IRCC representatives, and I said, well, Canada talks about promoting all these goodiness about what Canada is all about. So when you have been all these years out there and spoken about express entry as a pathway to come to Canada, and so many people have invested time, effort, and money behind the whole system with the understanding or with the expectations that they will get invited. Now that nothing happens and everybody keeps mum, right? There is not a word, not a single word from anybody from IRCC or Canada to sort of say what's happening. So obviously it's not fair to those guys, but what in your opinion you think should they be doing? I mean, should they give up?
To people who are
Federal skilled
in the
workers
pool,
waiting for those draws, what should they be doing?
um, well, they should remain in the pools for sure. And I think you talked about this. I watched your the episode that you did on planning for the year in 2022, and you
Yeah.
talked about how people should watch New Brunswick. And one thing that I think people should do, and I just noticed the comments on the right, but yeah, one thing that I think people should do is, kind of do what you said. And when it's coming to watch New Brunswick, is indicate if they just want to move to Canada and they're flexible on which province they want to live in, check every province that they would actually consider living in, because some of the provinces, one thing that hasn't slowed is provincial nominations. And a lot of provinces proactively go into the express entry pool and invite people to apply for permanent residence. Ontario does this, for example. We have a client from India who got invited to apply for permanent residence as a provincial nominee through the Ontario Human Capital Stream. For everyone else who's waiting, I would say that, I mean, yeah, like it's frustrating that, especially the lack of any messaging from the department as to what the plan is. I think that, you know, unless you know people in Canada who can help you with a job offer and get you to Canada, there's not much to do but wait and possibly improve your language tests if possible, because when those draws resume, the points threshold is going to be high for the federal skilled workers class.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, it sucks. I feel for people who are in the federal skilled worker pool. I don't want to say get out of the pool, because I know a lot of people, you know, I know a lot of like immigration lawyers and consultants who wouldn't register people for the CEC if they had less than like 400 points because there were no draws. And then all of a sudden one day IRCC did that draw of 75 points.
Yeah.
And everyone who had said, oh, I'm not comfortable registering you below that, felt like they'd miss. But that, I mean, it's just an example of like why people get frustrated with the department, because for years, you pretty much, I think forever for the express entry, you always needed at least about 410 points and up. Then one day, without warning, the department drops it to 75. So then what happens? Thousands of people with 75 points to 350 points. And people just start, everyone's like, oh, are they going to do this again? And then they don't. And the lack of messaging, I think, is part, and the unpredictability is frankly just like cruel. And I think part of why people are really frustrated with the department.
Sure. Wow. Okay. A lot of people are saying, why am I not showing you the comments? And I should not show you the comments because you will be shocked as to how upset
No,
people
there's a
are.
button. I realized there's a button that had been set to me for default
It's
of
not that I
private
don't want
chat.
to show the comments or something. It's just that we are having such an interesting discussion. But I mean, I want everybody to understand that it's more to do with opinion. Okay. Just the way I have an opinion, Stephen has an opinion. All of everybody else who's listening also have their opinion. These are all based on certain things, certain data, certain trends that you look at, certain historical things that have happened. You look at. It does not necessarily mean this is how it's going to play out. It does not necessarily mean it's not going to work out. It does not necessarily mean any of that. It is just an anticipation. It is just, or rather, not even an anticipation for that matter at this point of time, but it is more or less as in what can possibly happen. The idea, and Stephen warned me in the beginning itself, and he said he would have a more pessimistic outlook to share rather than me.
I felt like
Otherwise,
I had to offset your optimistic.
yes.
But I
I
mean, here's the question that you might, you know, given your clientele and the names in the in the audience,
yeah,
which I can see is largely from India. And I'm
yes,
just looking at the COVID, you know, India looks like it's in the midst of going through its next COVID wave. And the possibilities, like we saw how that just wreaked, the Delta wave wreaked havoc on
yeah,
IRCC. You know, we haven't even like talked about whether this next wave will cause similar, how India will react to this wave in terms of possible lockdowns. We
sure.
know through ATIPs that and I don't know if this has changed since 2021, but in 2021, part of the delay was that IRCC staff, for whatever reason, can't work remotely in India. They don't let the locally engaged staff work, at least in 2021. They didn't let the locally engaged staff work remotely in India. And it was also limited for visa officers. So, and that delay is still, like,
Ongoing, right?
I don't think I've ever seen, like, there was no other country, it seemed, possibly Brazil, but no other country for as long that was impacted. What will 2022 bring in terms of that processing? And you're more familiar with like probably this topic than I am. Like what have you heard from your clients in terms of biometric centers closing again, a possible lockdown?
Well, I mean, India is a beast by itself, and different things matter. But before, I mean, I answer you. I answer that question as to what's happening. As of right now, I don't think there are any lockdowns at all. The biometrics are happening. Yeah, there were some other issues with the biometrics in terms of the kind of process that IRCC adopted or VFS adopted with biometrics, that wasn't seemed to be working because it gave place for a lot of unscrupulous middle agents to make some money while they were booking for people and then selling those slots out. But that has been taken care of. But New Delhi visa office, it's such a huge visa office, right? In terms of the geography that it sort of manages, the number of applications it manages. Don't you think it's shocking that in today's day and time when so much of technology is available, that they couldn't get themselves up and running, I mean, now knowing that how pandemic is going to behave itself. I mean, we are now at 2 years plus into pandemic. Uh, and New Delhi visa office is still pretty, they still haven't woken up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know I would imagine it has to do with IT concerns. Like we saw the criticisms in China over the visa application centers and who owns them, Chinese government, and whether there's similar, not that the Indian government owns stuff, but that the security of using VPNs or Indian networks in terms of whether it's possible that they'll be hacked or whether there's sufficient privacy and like IT security, I would think would be the big concern. And why they didn't bring everyone, why they don't just bring people home and process applications in Canada, I'm not sure, but I have to assume that it's data security is the concern because the government, especially after what happened in China and the amount of political flack the government got for whether information that was being sent through visa application centers in China was secure. I would imagine there's a similar situation in India.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair point. Yeah, but even in spite of that, right? By now you would have imagined that they would get the whole act together and get this sorted out. But
I'm
unfortunately,
not sure the IT, like the online, like if you do look, if you look at the department, like you almost feel bad for the department because they're bringing in a new IT system here with like, and different companies seem to be doing a new portal for TRPR, new citizenship,
yeah,
new this, new that, all having to somehow integrate into their system, all while the number of applications keep piling up and piling up.
yeah.
Like, honestly, it wouldn't, and I have no proof of this, but it wouldn't surprise me if part of the reason why certain streams are delayed is just because the IT is still being configured and worked out. And if
Wow.
applications just aren't being brought forward, and they're trying to do AI at the same time to integrate into all this, like it's,
Oh boy,
yeah,
AI. I would like to talk to you about AI, but I think I would like to sort of have you back on
yeah,
another
for
day
sure.
to talk about that. But just one last parting question, and because there are so many questions with that aspect as well. And again, this has to do with the New Delhi visa office largely because other visa offices haven't been doing it. And obviously, since you have access to so many, I mean, you keep getting all these ATIC notes. What have you seen with these spouse open work permits? What's going on with that? I mean, New Delhi again hasn't processed spouse open work permits since early 2020s.
Well, people
Why?
should mandamus. That's the type of thing that should be mandamus. Or the demand letter sent in at least for mandamus. Because like, so an example where the work permit processing delays, why a mandamus should work is because the Indian or the IRCC website says that work permit applications in India are taking, I don't know, like what does it say, 60 days, something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
So stuff that's that delayed is that, and especially like that's an example of where there's hardship because there's family reunification issues.
sure.
But the other thing with C42 work permits is it has the lowest approval rate. And that's the program that, as I
Spoke about earlier.
blogged about, has the misrepresentation as a policy of deterrence.
But even
Um,
C41s, right? I mean, whether it's C41s or C42s, both of them, at the end of the day, uh, their spouse who's in Canada will soon run out of their eligibility in terms of their existing study permit or work permit. And then their spouses who are in India, they will no longer be eligible to actually come to Canada on their work permits. So why the delay then for such a long
oh, it's
time?
nuts. And then the people who could have come here as students, yeah, like you said, they're now postgraduate work permit holders. Um, and do they have a skilled job? Do they still meet eligibility requirements? Meanwhile, there's these delays. I think that there needs to be greater push on these. And I mean, part of the reality, like part of the situation right now is that because so many mandamus applications are being filed, like let's say that the department is dedicating resources to those and you're waiting for your open spousal work permit to be processed. And how would I put this? That as you're waiting, other people are figuring out, as you're sitting in the left lane behind a stalled car, other people are figuring out that they can pull into the right lane and get around and get in front. And
Yeah.
so you're not moving. And the only real solution to that is to try to force your way into the front to move. Because otherwise, I don't know why those applications get treated so poorly, but it just seems to be what it is right now. I do think frequent like the solution to this, by the way, like people do GCMS requests to get status updates, which is fine, but it in of itself isn't going to get your application processed any faster. And it is more sending the case-specific inquiries, contacting the visa posts. New Delhi, I actually find to be pretty responsive for the files that I have there, but just like pushing. I think sitting back and waiting in the current environment will not work, especially because. So do you remember, like in September, like the signal that there might have been a big problem was in, and you have to use the Wayback Archive to do this because I tried to show this to someone and they initially didn't believe, and you have to do the Google Archives. In September, I think it was September 7 or 17, IRCC posts on its website that if you submitted a temporary resident visa before September, that you should reapply and you wouldn't get a refund.
Yeah.
And there was an outrage. And then the next day, they stealth edit their website to say, you don't need to reapply, but inform us of the change. And that's still what's currently on the website. But as people seem to have noticed, the people who are applying after September are often getting processed quicker than the people who applied before. So it almost makes it seem like the original update that they posted was correct and that you needed to reapply. But then that looked bad, so they changed it to something that doesn't reflect things now. And then people see that people who apply later are getting in faster. So if you've been waiting, like if you applied before September 2021 and you've been waiting, I don't think it's a bad idea to reapply again if you're still eligible. Obviously, if an LMIA is expired, you can't. But an open spousal, I would possibly apply again. And what sucks is the department said they won't refund fees from the first application.
Yeah, I'm sure people would really care about that $100 or whatever. But wasn't that more to do with the TRVs in terms of the visit visas? And this is primarily the spouse open work permit. So would that still be treated? Because the new portal won't accept these spouse open work permits. So you'll have to still go back to the old GC keys to create your spouse open work permit.
You know, it wouldn't surprise me if new work permits are also being processed faster, because it's kind of like the same with. I think there's a degree of this is just natural, right? Where like, I mean, I'm sure everyone's had it in an occasion with their email where there's some old emails that languish, and you try to get rid of the new easy ones quick.
Yeah.
And that's basically how IRCC is running right now. It feels like where anything that's complicated kind of just sits and they're trying to meet their targets and processing things really quick. So reapplying in a new application, instead of your application being one of the ones that's stuck, which might ultimately be bulk processed anyways by Chinook, might be the way to go, like to just reapply.
All right. Well,
now, I do want to. I see that there's some of the comments now are so. There's Lavanya writes, and I'm curious to know if this is widespread sentiment. That is India. Her question basically or his question, I can't, basically, is India being penalized because it's the #1 country of immigrants? And they want to reduce numbers. And I've heard this sentiment expressed a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to your thoughts.
Well, I definitely don't think so because, I mean, are you going to blame the country of 1.3 billion people for being, you know, being good with what? They are one of the youngest populations. The average age in India is now 27 or 28 years old. Education is something which most Indians would thrive for. So, getting a bachelor's degree or a master's degree is just about given. Thankfully, English as a language is also quite widely spoken. So,
Yeah,
if
no, I
these
agree.
are the factors which Canada considers as important factor points, then they cannot ignore India at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. I
I mean,
don't,
at
but
the end
I
of the
have
day,
seen that sentiment
yeah.
expressed a lot and that concern expressed.
No, and anytime whenever any country is looking to attract immigration, they're usually looking to attract people who are younger. Why? Because they want these younger people to obviously reproduce and they're longer tax paying within the longer tax paying bracket. Makes sense. But then again, then India becomes a very, very good choice or a popular choice because again, as I said, the average Indian age is only 27, 28 years old at this point of time.
Yeah, no,
So
I
they
agree.
just cannot ignore it. You just cannot. If you open it, unless you bring back some sort of a nationality level quota or a country level quota, just the way US has, right? So where they restrict certain countries or the number of applications from certain countries. Well, that if that ever came across one, that would, I'm sure, bring out quite a few litigations. But at the same time, that could sort of curtail the number of applications. But I don't see that happening anytime soon at all.
Yeah. Oh, I'm getting a kick out of some of the comments now. Thank God this guy is not an IRCC, else FSW will be banned forever. No, you're right. I don't
Well,
work for the department. I mean, and I still my clients are in FSW and I push for them. But if I can see yeah, CC
you're not a
I
popular
think
guy
should.
today for expressing your opinion. But
You
but
should
but I
see me
do.
on Twitter. A lot of people think I work for the department. Actually, the one tweet that I did that generated the most controversy was I thought that overall Marco Mendicino did a good job. Whoa, whoa.
I can imagine with the way the sentiments happen. But again, I want everybody who's watching. I would like you to sort of give it a moment and think. Uh, Stephen is not trying to sort of dissuade you from coming to Canada. He's not saying this is not going to happen. Again, and I'm repeating this because I said this earlier as well, he's expressing his opinion based on the fact of what has been seen historically earlier, as well as what the data is looking at this point of time. It's purely opinion based, it's purely what he thinks. Again, in contrast, as he said earlier, when we were talking earlier before the streaming, that he would have a pessimistic approach. And you cannot blame anybody. I mean, look what happened with 2021. I mean, we all thought that something good is going to happen, but we all were absolutely disappointed. This year has started. Yes, it's just the beginning, and there are a lot of things that are still we don't know and that still have to be uncovered. For example, we still have to see the new quotas that would be announced early February. That would give us a much more clearer picture. The IRCC themselves, and again, I think it was Stephen, through one of your internal memos that you shared with me earlier, also was that they were looking to resume the express entry draws once they have reached at least 50% of their processing capacity, or rather, the 50% of the backlogs in economic programs. I definitely think they have reached 50% of backlogs, again, based on how much processing capacity they have. But at this point of time, again, what Stephen said as well is that Canadian experience class candidates who are currently in Canada, they really have a bit of a difficulty because a lot of them are losing status, they're going out of status, and there hasn't been any draw. So the expectation is that yes, at least Stephen is not so confident, but at least I again, the way the forever hopeful that I am, and sometimes silly, but my expectation is that, which is in contrast with Stevens, is that there definitely will be a federal skilled worker draw. May not happen immediately. I think the first priority, if at all CEC resumes, if at all IRCC resumes express entry draw, their first priority is going to be to clear out a bit of the CEC applications because they are now, going out of status. So it is quite possible that when the draws do resume, you will, or in the beginning, you would see more of CEC draws or a big chunk of draws for CEC. But I definitely expect federal skilled workers to come through or the draws to resume. Because that was also the impression I got during the NCIC conference from, I think it was Andrew who spoke. And yeah, that is going to be me keeping my fingers crossed. But Steven, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. This was fun. I enjoy conversations like this.
I'm not sure a lot of people out there who are watching were quite thrilled with this, with a lot of things that were said. But again, what you've said, there's nothing wrong in the sense like what you've spoken about is absolutely the way things could really pan out. They may be pessimistic, as you said, but there also is a hint of reality or realism in there. And yeah, we all need to sort of keep our expectations more.
Yeah. And I mean, if I had to give like some tips to people who are in that pool and are frustrated, it'd be like assuming you want to live in assuming you're willing to live in every province, express an interest in every province, because they do proactively draw. You don't have, some provinces, you don't have to apply to a PMP. They will contact you and say that they want to nominate you. Get, if possible, your language up or anything you can to increase points. Because I think we can agree on this. If there is a draw, the point threshold will be high for federal skilled worker. So do everything you can to get your points up. It was around 470 before the pandemic was for both CEC and FSW. And I think the first FSW draw, if there is one, will
500
will be high. Yeah, assuming it's not occupation specific. And then, start, like to the extent possible, network with people in Canada and see if you can procure job offers that way, whether it's, I see there's questions about ICT visas or some of the less explored categories like C20 for people from India, which are the reciprocity-based permits, are ways to get you in Canada and hopefully into the CEC pool.
Yeah. Again, Steven, I would certainly like to sort of have you back on, because there are so many questions which I couldn't ask you because our conversation really went on. But I would sort of, because there is one person who has been quite angry with me for not sort of taking up that question, and that is about family reunification and basically the spousal sponsorship application, as in the family class and the spouse in Canada class. Now, I know that at least for my clients, I have been seeing quite a reasonable amount of processing time, as in they are actually clearing out the applications inside 1 year. Have you seen any delays, or are you aware of anything which is not as per the standards in the spousal sponsorship applications or the family class?
No, as far as I can tell, spousal sponsorships aren't like they seem to be all over the place, but they don't, as far as I can tell, they're actually being processed more or less within their processing time. How long has this person been delayed?
No, I mean,
there's probably an exception for people in New India who need an interview, because I understand those are very hard to schedule.
Yeah.
But for people who are inside Canada in the inside spousal sponsorship stream, it's pretty fast right now.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing. So I'm not sure what the person was upset about, but I wanted to sort of take that question so that, because the person called me out and said I'm anti sponsorship application, which I'm not
no.
anti.
And you know what's really fast right now? You know that narrow category for people who are inside Canada who don't have.
Yeah.
Well, no. You know what's super fast? Hold on. You know that program for people who are inside Canada who want to sponsor someone because they don't have any relatives here?
Yeah.
I filed one at the end of October, and it was approved this week. So
you're talking about the Lonely Canadian?
Yeah, Lonely Canadian. That stream is flying. Like, I was stunned.
Okay.
I couldn't believe how fast it was.
Some magic there for a change.
I couldn't believe how fast it was.
All right, sir. Thank you so much, Stevens. I really, really appreciate. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, this was fun.
Thank you. All the best, sir.
Okay.
Right, everybody. Again, I've seen some of those comments, and as much as I appreciate your having made those comments, you also need to once again understand what I was trying to say to you. I Call me stupid, call me silly. I will remain forever hopeful. I will always keep anticipating and expecting the good things. What Steven said again was not out of line. There was, I mean, I've seen some comments which were, I mean, not called for. But at the end of the day, what he's doing is he's sharing what he sees, his point of view. If you don't like the point of view, that's absolutely fine. But there is no reason to sort of call him out and say things. Again, at the end of the day, he's my guest. I respect the fact that he's with us, sharing his insight, sharing his knowledge, which I consider to be quite valuable. So if you can gain some insight from that, apply it in your application, apply it in whatever your understanding is, it will immensely help you. Having said that, thank you very much. We will do this again. I will definitely have Steven up again and basically quiz him with some more details, some more questions next time. Let me see when he is available. We will also have some more featured guests going forward. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel, I am not sure what you're waiting for. I mean, gotta hit that button, man. Thank you very much. I shall see you next time. Until then, take care, be good, stay safe.